For 7-6 and 7-7, I'm doing these together, even though technically 7-6 is a little easier, but I want you to think of them all as one type of problem instead of this is one type and this is another type, because they're the same process in general. So let's start with number 1A. This is in 7-6. So 1A, 2A, and 3A at the top will be 7-6, and then 7-7 has 1A, 2A, 2B is what I'm doing. So in 7-6, if you'll look at this format, this is a quadratic. It has 3 terms, and the highest term is a squared term. And if you'll notice, all of them are the same. So they're all quadratics, and we're factoring trinomials, specifically quadratics here. The quadratics, remember, have a squared term is their highest degree term. And so squared, 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 3 terms, 3 terms, 3 terms. Same in 7-7, 3 terms squared, 3 terms a squared, and 3 terms a squared term. So what we have is, I hope this is supposed to be a D. Okay. In the format, ax squared plus bx plus c is our quadratic format here. A is the number that's in front of x squared, b is the number that's in front of x, and c is the number alone. So in this case, this is d's. So the a would be 1 because there's a 1 in front of d squared. The b would be 11 because there's an 11 in front of the d, and then the c would be the 24. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. A is 1, B is 11, C is 24 for this problem. For the next problem, it's in a different order, but you can use it the same way. So our 1 is still A. The B is negative 22. Make sure you keep the sign with it. And the C would be a positive 21. Okay, so you see kind of how this is going. This one, A equals 1 again, B equals 13, and C equals negative 48. Okay, in 7-7, the only difference is we have a number in front of the x squared now instead of 1. So on this one, A would be equal to 5, B would be equal to 13, and C is equal to 6. Same thing here, A is equal to 2, B is equal to negative 1, C is equal to negative 1. I'm going to hold off on 2B for a second because we're going to have to do something first before we factor this completely. So let's start by factoring. On last week I gave you a sum and product puzzles activity, which would help you to think about what you need on this type. So if you remember, we had x's, and there was a number at the top that you had to find the 2 factors that multiply to give you this number and then add to give you the bottom number. Where those numbers came from is at the top, A multiplied by C. So in this case, our A is 1 and our C is 24. So at the top, you'd have 24. And then at the bottom is your B. So the bottom is B, and that was 11 in this problem. And you're wanting 2 numbers that multiply to give you that 24 and add to give you that 11. So if you wanted to list all of the factors of 24, you could do 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. And then also because your multiplication is positive, we know that a positive multiplied by a positive equals positive, and a negative multiplied by a negative equals a positive. So we know that we can do either positives or we can do the same numbers but negative for both. Negative 2, negative 12, negative 3, negative 8. And there are more. 4 and 6 would work also, but I already know that because 11 is my adding, I know that 3 and 8 will add to give me 11, so I went ahead and stopped there. So 3 and 8 are my 2 numbers, and that means that my factors, actually, the easy way to do this is just take these numbers. If there's a 1, if your A value is 1, then your factors are whatever the variable is that you have, so D in this case. And then this is a positive 3, so I'm going to put plus 3. And the other factor is D, it's a positive 8, so I'm going to put plus 8. And this is actually my final answer here. There's a longer way to do it because when you have a number not 1 that's bigger than 1 in front of the x squared, you have to do it the long way. You can't do it this easy, fast, short way. But they're all the same type of problem, and we got a binomial multiplied by a binomial here for our answer, and you would get the same thing down here with the ones with a number in front. So let's go ahead and do this one. If I do my little x, my a multiplied by c would be 1 multiplied by 21, so 21. My b is at the bottom, negative 22. And I know that because negative 22 is bigger than 21, I actually can tell that the two numbers are going to be just 21 and 1. But because this addition is negative, they both have to be negative. Also, because to get a positive at the top, the signs have to be the same when you're multiplying, because this one is the multiplication and this one is the addition. So negative 21 plus negative 1 equals negative 22, and negative 1 times negative 1 equals 21. So these are our two numbers, and so our factors are, we're using m's, so m minus 21 and m minus 1. And so we're finished with these. Here again, this one is just a basic 1 for the a value. So at the top here, a times c is 1 times negative 48. 1 times negative 48. And that gives us negative 48. And at the bottom, we have a positive 13. Okay, so if I were to list the factors of 48, I can do that, and I would get 1 and 48. Now, the top is negative, and when you get a negative when you're multiplying, you have to have two opposite signs. So I can make 1 and negative 48, but I can also do negative 1 and positive 48. Same thing with 2 and 24. One of them has to be negative. So I'm going to write both. 3 and 16. 4 and 12. And then you can keep going. There's 6 and 8 still. I know that I'm finished when the two numbers are pretty much the same. So when they're very close to each other, I am probably finished. I can keep going. 7 does not go evenly into it. And then I would hit 8 again after 7. So I just did 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is not a factor. 6, 7 is not a factor, and I can do 8, but I've already got 8 in this factor. So I know that I'm finished, and I have already found all the factors at that point. Okay, so I want two numbers. These are all the ones that multiply to give me negative 48, but I also want the two numbers to add to give me 13. So I know that right here, 3 and negative 16, those are 13 units apart. But this one would give me a negative 13. So I want the positive 16 and the negative 3 because the bigger number will be this sign here. So I have a negative 3 and a positive 16. And that means my factors are, we have y's in this case. Y minus 3 and y plus 16. And these are my two factors for that one. Okay, the longer ways, you would still have to start out by doing your x. So a times c at the top here is 5 times 6, so that's 30. And then the 13 would be at the bottom. 30 and 13 are pretty easy because the factors of 30 are only 1 and 30, 3 and 10, 2 and 15. So, and I know that since everything's positive, they're going to have to be two positive numbers. And so I know that 10 and 3 are my two factors. So here's where it gets a little bit different. We have to expand this. So what I'm going to do is instead of 13x I'm going to replace it with 10x plus 3x. So I keep the 5x the same, 5x squared, and I keep the positive 6 the same actually also. So the first and the last terms will stay the same, but the middle term is going to be broken into these two terms. They're going to have the same letter that the middle term has. So this is plus 10x and plus 3x. You can put them in whichever order you want. It doesn't actually matter. I like to put them in an order where they're kind of alike. So 3 and 6 are both divided by 3, and then 5 and 10 can both be divided by 5. But it doesn't matter. You can put the 3x here and the 10x here if you want. Okay, so once we have that middle term expanded into two different terms, we're going to split it in the middle and factor out the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor of 5x squared and 10x is 5x. Okay, so after we factor it out, 5x divided by 5x, 5x squared divided by 5x gives me x. 10x divided by 5x gives me 2. And this one, we're going to do the same thing. The greatest common factor of 3x and 6 is a positive 3. So when I divide by positive 3, I get x plus 2. If you did it correctly, the two parentheses parts will be exactly the same, because your two factors then will be 5x plus 3, so 5x from here, and 3 plus there, or from there. And then your x plus 2 is the other factor. Okay, so here's my two factors, and I'm finished with that one. This one is the same process. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, and negative 1 goes on the bottom. Negative 2 is a prime number, so it has to be 1 and 2. Then you just have to figure out the signs. So because this is negative, one of them has to be positive and one has to be negative. And the bigger one has to be negative because the bottom is negative. So this is negative 2 and positive 1. I'm going to put the 2n squared from here, and the negative 1 stays the same at the end. In the middle, I'm going to have your negative 2n and negative 1n. So I split the middle. I cut it in half. Greatest common factor here is 2n. 2n divided by 2n. 2n squared divided by 2n is n. 2n divided by 2n is 1, so I'm going to put minus 1 because it was a negative. And then over here, because the first term is negative, I have to take out a negative. So I'm taking out a negative 1 because that's all they have in common. And so I'm dividing by negative 1, which only changes signs. So this would give me a positive n, and this would give me a positive 1. Oh, that's not positive. I'm sorry. This was positive from the number over here, so that's actually going to be a positive 1 that I'm taking out so that this stays negative. I'm sorry, that was my mistake. So positive 1 is what I'm factoring out. Okay, so my two factors then are 2n plus 1 and n minus 1. Okay, and then the very last one, you have to check and make sure that there's nothing that you can factor out first. So 10, 35, and 30 have 5 in common. So I'm actually going to factor out a 5 first. 10 divided by 5 gives me 2y squared. 35 divided by 5 is 7y, and 30 divided by 5 is positive 6. Okay, so after you've gotten a greatest common factor out, then you can factor this part like we did up here. So I want the two numbers that multiply. I'm going to kind of just leave this 5 off for right now. 2 multiplied by 6 gives me 12, and negative 7 on the bottom. Okay, my factors that give me negative 7 when I add and multiply to give me 12, they would have to be the same sign, and because this is negative, they would have to both be negative. So I know that negative 4 and negative 3 are my two numbers. If I were to write out the factors, I could find that. Or you can do it in your head if you can think of it. Okay, I'm gonna keep the 5, rewrite 2y squared, change the negative 7y to negative 4y and negative 3y, and put the plus 6. I'm gonna split the middle, so I still have the 5, and then inside I've got the greatest common factor here is 2y. After I divide by 2y, I'm gonna get y, and then minus 2. Here I'm factoring out a negative 3. So I'm going to get y minus 2 again. So I have a 5 out front, and my 2 binomial factors are 2y minus 3, and then y minus 2 is inside the parentheses, so y minus 2. Okay, and then I'm finished with that one.